Hi everyone, and welcome to week 5, Delivering Your Speech. You'll notice that many of the things your text goes into this week are concepts we've been discussing all quarter. Now that you've learned about these topics, this is where the rubber meets the road. It's time to take the things that we've talked about and think about how you'll apply them to your own speeches in real life. Think back to week 1 when we talked about communication competence, your ability to deliver a message effectively and appropriately, and I'll refer to that a few times in this lecture. Your choice of a delivery method will determine your ability to achieve those goals. Additionally, your personal appearance, your nonverbal communication, and your vocal behaviors will also determine the effectiveness and appropriateness of your message. Last week we took a more in-depth look at some delivery styles. Now it's time to think back on those classroom discussions, the sample speeches you've watched, and the information you read about in your text. You should have enough information at this point to make a decision on the style that will work the best for you. As you think about each style, make sure you're weighing your pros and your cons. With manuscript delivery, for example, having a script might make you feel better, might make you feel more secure. However, you run the risk of failing to engage your audience because you're simply reading from a page. Memorized delivery might be a good option if you really do know all of your material by heart, but you do run that similar risk of alienating your audience if your message comes across like you're reciting it and not really connecting to your listeners. Impromptu delivery is what we'll do in class this week. You won't have a lot of time to prepare, but as your text points out, most impromptu speaking involves talking about something that you know a lot about. You will rarely be asked to make an impromptu speech on a topic that's not very familiar to you. Sometimes impromptu speaking can be used along with a scripted speech, like Martin Luther King Jr. does at the end of his I Have a Dream speech. Extemporaneous delivery is what you'll see most often at work or at school. Last week we talked about content outlines, speaking notes, and speaking outlines. The key is to establish an outline or a method of notes that work for you, and then you memorize thought patterns instead of memorizing whole sentences. The way I lecture in class is an extemporaneous style. I have bulleted points just like I do on my slides here, and those help me organize my thoughts. I know the content front to back because I'm well prepared, which we know is very important. The speaking part is really just a matter of communicating those thoughts in the right order to my audience. The concept of impression management is about the way we use props and personal mannerisms to give off an impression of ourselves. Your physical appearance includes things like the clothes you wear, your accessories, your posture, your gestures. The impression you create is about being sincere, coming across in a way that matches your intention, and that's where the ethical implications come into play. Misleading people with a false impression is unethical because it means that you don't really believe in your own message. Again, I bring up communication competence. Is your message appropriate? Is it effective? And how does your personal appearance support that message? Let's talk a little bit about developing effective mannerisms. At this point, you have all seen me lecture in class. I think you know what that looks like. Big arms and hands. You know that gesture control is something that I really have to make a concentrated effort to demonstrate. When I say gestures, I mean any movement that happens during your speech. It can be big, like me in the front of the room waving my arms. It can be a smirk on your face. It can be the way you slump your shoulders when you talk about something sad or when you're not very confident. It's important to make sure that those movements go with the structure of your speech. If you're the kind of person who uses too many gestures, I may or may not be guilty of that, and you maybe don't put them in the right spots, make a conscious effort to limit some of those habits so they don't detract from the message. If you're the opposite of that and you struggle to work those gestures in when you talk, consider making yourself some notes about where you can effectively add them in. So for example, you could make a note that reminds you to use your hands to demonstrate the distance between two things that you're talking about. Remember that your gestures, like any other element of your delivery style, should be very natural. If you force it, it'll seem awkward. If you use gestures in the right ways, then they shouldn't feel out of place. Eye contact is another mannerism that can be really hard for people. For a variety of reasons, not everyone is comfortable with eye contact. If looking your listeners directly in the eye makes you uncomfortable, consider tips like looking at their shoulder or the side of their face or just to the left of their eyes. Just like speakers, sometimes listeners don't like eye contact either. That can be sometimes just a matter of preference, but it can also be very rooted in an individual's culture. Choose a way to give the impression of eye contact and engagement in a way that's comfortable for you. Your vocal behavior has to do with everything except the words, so it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. Make sure that you pronounce words clearly. Check a dictionary if you're unclear about a pronunciation. Articulation can often demonstrate a lot of different things about you to your audience, like where you're from. For example, you might have noticed that I am from Wisconsin by my accent. Your ethnic background, your social status. One more time for good measure, a competent communicator is effective and appropriate. So work on pronouncing and articulating words that give you trouble. Slowing down is often a part of making sure your audience can understand you, and that can be really difficult for people, especially when you're nervous. If you have an accent, don't try to hide it. In the Diversity in Practice section of this week's reading, Yan Hong Krumpacki says, "This is a country built on accents. Accent is one of the most conspicuous symbols of what makes America the free and prosperous land its own people are proud of and other people long to live in." As with any vocal behavior, it's really important that you rehearse, speak at a slow enough pace, and work on sounds or words that give you difficulty. Let's talk a little bit about pauses. Sometimes you pause on purpose. Sometimes you don't pause on purpose. A pause can be very effective, say if you want to give your audience time to think, for example. Sometimes you'll pause because you've completely lost your train of thought and you have no idea what to say next, and a lot of people will try to fill those silences with some sort of vocalized pause, like an or like, or you know. If you think that there are places where you do need a pause, make a mark in your notes that reminds you to take that little break. If you have the habit of filling pauses vocally with words like make a conscious effort to allow yourself that little pause without adding that interruption. I promise you, it's a habit you can break when you become comfortable with a little bit of silence. When you pause and you're the speaker, it seems like an eternity, but an audience will barely notice if you don't draw attention to it. If you need the time to collect your thoughts, take the time. Your audience will still be there when you're ready to move forward. Consider also the vocal components that you can control: your volume, your pitch, your rate. Your vocal variations create an impression too. Your audience might even judge your credibility based on your vocal variations. Again, the important thing is to speak naturally and conversationally. With experience, you'll learn to adjust things like your volume, your rate, or your rhythm to your message. You put that all together, and that's what comes across as a confident conversational style. One your listeners can really connect with, and you can show your audience the real you. That's what will make your style work. Don't forget, the effectiveness of your delivery style is all about practice. Consider the nonverbal elements like the way you look, the mannerisms you use, and how you manage your impression. Remember that you have an ethical obligation to make sure your impression matches your message. Before you choose anything, whether it's the shirt you wear or the way you move your hands, ask yourself if it's genuine. When you're fully prepared and confident, these elements all work together to make your message appropriate and effective. So now what? Make sure that you have read Chapter 14, as well as the 3 articles in this week's module. The articles really demonstrate how public speaking skills can make or break a career, and that's what this course is all about. These are skills that you'll use in real life. There's a page called Elements and Patterns in Speech that reviews a few of the concepts we've covered over the last 2 weeks. I recommend walking through the exercise. It's very brief, and it's good practice for the coming speeches. Pay very careful attention to the discussion prompt this week. Before you submit your initial post, make sure you've answered all of the questions in the prompt thoroughly. The written assignment encompasses all the concepts that we've talked about for the last 2 weeks, so as you complete it, think about which style will work the best for you. And again, make sure you address all the elements of the assignment. The speech projects overview that I've included will give you an idea what to expect for the rest of the quarter. I'll fill in the details around those speeches as we approach them. This week's impromptu speech will be assigned at the beginning of class, so there's not really anything you can do to prepare for the topic itself, but you can make sure you're ready by thinking about your own personal delivery style and managing your impression in the ways that we've covered this week. I'm really looking forward to your first speeches, and I know that you're going to do a great job. See you soon.